Hey everyone, welcome to today's video. Today we're going to be talking about the 2026 Senate race in the state of Maine. There's some news out in the race today. Senator Susan Collins, the Republican, has announced her re-election bid to serve a sixth term in the United States Senate. Now, this is important because Senator Collins is one of the few Republicans to serve in what is considered a Democratic-leaning, or even you could say toss-up, state. So this race is going to shape out to be really important, a really important one for this upcoming midterm cycle. And her announcement for her reelection is really important as well. Truth be told, if Susan Collins was not running in this race, we could easily say that the Democrats would have a much better opportunity to pick up this seat come November of 2026. But given Susan Collins' announcement today that she is running for this race, it makes it a significantly harder race to win for Democrats. I say that because if we go back to the 2020 election cycle, Susan Collins faced Sarah Gideon. And if we scroll down and look at some of the polling in this race, if you immediately look, at the margin from this race, let's go back to 2020. Susan Collins won by 8.5 percentage points. So the immediate thought process is, well, polls must have predicted that. Well, actually, you would be wrong. Polls predicted quite the opposite. They predicted that Sarah Gideon would win this race, but Susan Collins came in and won it by 8.5 percentage points, which leads us to 2026 and to say, what's going to happen in this election? Is Susan Collins going to be able to do what she did in 2020 and outperform polls on every measure? The last poll in 2020 that had her even tied was in September 20th through the 22nd, which was even a Republican-leaning pollster, and it had it tied. This race, on average, with 270 to win, had it about 4 percentage points, and Real Clear Politics 6.5 percentage points in favor of the Democrat, Sarah Gideon. So this race was a real interesting one. Democrats really believed they had an opportunity to flip this race and give them a shot at Senate control, which they ended up getting with the 2 Georgia seats. But it's an important one to note because as we go into 2026, when this race is going to be on the ballot again, Senator Collins is saying, I'm running for re-election, and I've won in the past. I know how to win here. So if we go back to 2014, Susan Collins won the state by 37%. If we go back to 2008, she won it by 22%. If we go back to 2002, she won it by 16.9%. If we go back to 1996, she won it by 5 percentage points. That's the closest race she's ever had. Was back in 96. Before that, the seat was not that was not her seat. I apologize. So, in 1996, that was her first time running, and it was the closest match she'd ever faced. The second closest being back in 2020, when she won by 8.5%. So, as we go into 2026, the race is really shaping out to be an interesting race already. We already assumed Susan Collins was going to run, so this announcement today isn't necessarily a shock, but it is important to note because of who's running against her on the Democratic side. We have people such as Janet Mills, who's the governor of Maine currently. Her term ends in 2026, and Graham Plattner, who has really striked an interest amongst progressives, receiving endorsements from people like Bernie Sanders. So this race really will shape out to be an interesting one. I also want to point out as well that if we go into the governor's races from 2022, we can see that Janet Mills won this race in 2022 by 13%. So you may be thinking, well, if Democrats nominate Janet Mills, she's certain to win, right? And while in some circumstances Janet Mills is a very good candidate for the Democrats to recruit on that end, she's won statewide before, she knows how to do it, the question is Janet Mills going to face the same struggles that Sarah Gideon faced in 2020 when she ran against Susan Collins, and all the polls suggested that she would win. That's the big question going into 2026, and what's going to happen next? See, Susan Collins has had this seat for, if she's reelected, what will be 6 terms. Remind you, Susan Collins, when she originally ran, said she would only run for 2, and now she's running for her 6th term. So a real interesting race nonetheless. It's certain that Maine voters are more amped to vote for Democrats in modern political history, but Susan Collins has been that one Republican who's been able to hold on to her seat. The question is given the environment in 2026 when we expect it to be largely Democrat, is she going to be able to do that again? Whether she faces Susan Collins or she faces Graham Plattner, she's certainly going to have an uphill battle. Now, again, historically speaking, she may be able to pull this off. If we go back to 2020, she did before. She's done it before. She's been able to pull off races like this before. When she was down and everybody counted her out, she came back and outperformed polls by every stretch of the imagination, winning by 8.5%. The difference between 2020 and 2026, though, is the environment. While Donald Trump lost the presidential election cycle in 2020, and some may say, well, the cycle ran in favor of Democrats. That's not 100% true. If we look back at 2020 and look at polling in 2020, a lot of the polling suggested that Donald Trump was totally out of question in the 2020 election cycle, and he really outperformed. Even though he lost, he still outperformed polls, as he always has when he's on the ballot. So the question is given 2026 Democratic environment that we expect it to be, will Susan Collins be able to hold on to this race? Or can someone like Janet Mills, who's the current governor and who's won statewide before by double-digit margins, be able to come and win the race? I also want to take a look too, because I didn't actually look at this before the video started, but if we look at 2018's margin, Janet Mills won this race in 2018 by 7.7%. So going into 2022, when it was a more Republican environment, but some can question that, I guess, Janet Mills won this race by 13.2%. So she outperformed her margin from 2018 when the odds were in her favor more so, I should say. So this is going to be a really interesting race as we head into the November elections, and we're going to have a lot more to talk about when we find out who the Democrats decide to nominate. And it certainly appears that maybe Janet Mills has the upper hand in the Democratic nomination, but Graham Plattner is certainly giving her a run for her money. Graham Plattner seems to think that he's the candidate to beat Susan Collins in this race, a newcomer, progressive type candidate who can really appeal to those voters. So we'll see what the Democrats decide to do, and we'll see how the race starts to shape out as we head into November. But I think it's important to note that Susan Collins has outperformed polls before, and she's came back from when everyone counted her out and won the race. So when we look at this race, it may be slightly different than when we look at other races. We may have to look into more details as we go into the future, into 2026 and into the summer and fall, and really pay attention to some of those outside factors and see how Maine voters are feeling about Susan Collins. Do they seem to like her? Do they not? Are they encouraged to vote for her again, or are they not? Are Democrats going to be able to overperform because simply Donald Trump is in the White House? Are Democrats going to be able to use that to their advantage and tie Susan Collins, which Maine voters seem to not like, to Donald Trump? So we'll see what happens. I think this is really going to shape out to be an interesting race. I just wanted to hop on here and let you guys know that Susan Collins is running for re-election and show you a little bit of the historical odds and how overall, she's outperformed polling before, and that she certainly can do it again. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know what you think about this race in Maine in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.